Today's Bible study comes from John chapter 6, verses 1 through 15, and reads as follows. Sometime after this, Jesus crossed to the far shore of the Sea of Galilee, that is, the Sea of Tiberias, and a great crowd of people followed him because they saw the signs he had performed by healing the sick. Then Jesus went up on a mountainside and sat down with his disciples. The Jewish Passover festival was near. When Jesus looked up and saw a great crowd coming toward him, he said to Philip, "Where shall we buy bread for these people to eat?" He asked this only to test him, for he already had in mind what he was going to do. Philip answered him, "It would take more than half a year's wages to buy enough bread for each one to have a bite." Another of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, spoke up. "Here is a boy with 5 small barley loaves and 2 small fish, but how far will they go among so many?" Jesus said, "Have the people sit down." There was plenty of grass in the place, and they sat down. About 5,000 men were there. Jesus then took the loaves, gave thanks, and distributed to those who had seated as much as they wanted. He did the same with the fish. When they had enough to eat, he said to the disciples, "Gather the pieces that are left over. Let nothing be wasted." So they gathered them all and filled 12 baskets with the pieces of the 5 barley loaves left over by those who had eaten. After the people saw the signs Jesus performed, they began to say, "Surely this is the prophet who is to come into the world." Jesus, knowing that they intended to come and make him king by force, withdrew again to a mountainside. Uh-oh. Here's a time when Jesus knew what was going to happen. And he sets out to be doing a good deed. After these things, Jesus went over to the Sea of Galilee. John now records the acts and the words of Jesus in Galilee. Um, the great multitude that had followed him, the miracle that was recorded of the 3 gospel accounts. Luke mentioned that one occasion Jesus went out and to a deserted place to be alone. Yet the crowds followed them there in spite of the imposition. Jesus still served the multitude with great compassion. Now, remember, they had saw all the signs of what Jesus had performed from those who were diseased, and he taught multitudes. And John mentions that a lot. He tells you that Jesus was teaching. The Passover feast, a feast of the Jews, was near. The only one that mentions that is John, is only one of the 4 gospel who told us it took place near the time of Passover. But the funny thing here is Jesus asked his disciple Philip first, and they all had been given power to do these things, and he said, and seeing a great multitude coming toward, he said to Philip, "Where shall we buy bread that these may eat?" Jesus asked Philip the question because, was he from Bethsaida? Now Philip, no. And he knew where the miracle took place there, though. They had returned, told him all they had done. Remember, and this is what messes you up, because here's another instance. If you look back in the book of Luke, when the disciples had taken off and been gone, and Jesus had given them power, and they had this power to feed people, because they had all the power he'd given them. They could heal, they could bring them back from death, the sick, all that. When they came back, they were telling him of all the things he did, but when he asked them to feed the people, it tripped them up. So where did their faith go that fast? Because Jesus didn't take it back, nor does he take it back. You may give it back. You may give it back in your doubt. You may let a little bump in the road mess you up, but the disciples had power and they were using it. Remember, Jesus sent them out in the book of Luke. And then it was Luke 9, and when they come back in Luke 9, I'm sorry. And then once again, he sends them out at the beginning of Luke chapter 10, and they got power again. So he was testing them. Um, and they talked about the money it would cost and how long it would cost and all that. But that wasn't really what was going on. Jesus was looking for something else from his disciple. And he said it to test him for Jesus knew what to do, and Jesus knew what miracle he was about to perform, but he was trying to teach his disciples something. He was trying to teach the disciples while this was happening. And Philip had seen things. He had seen Jesus do many miracles, as we said, when he was in Bethsaida. And how can I put, there shouldn't have been any doubt about what was available to Jesus and the disciples with the faith. Everything was available to you with faith. And Jesus was showing Philip, and he was going to show the rest of them this also, because Andrew was about to see it. So one of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, said to him, "There is a lad here who has barley loaves and 2 small fish, but what are they among so many?" It should have been, "We got a God that can do much with little. Look at us. Look at us." So Andrew once again introduced himself to Jesus. And, he was, first it was his brother, Peter. And then now it was a lad with some barley loaves and two small fish. Now, this wasn't a lot to feed people, but you had to stop looking at the physicality and look at the spirituality. Then Jesus said, "Make these people sit down." Now there was much grass in the place, so the men sat down, in number about 5,000, just the men. So Jesus was saying, don't panic, don't worry, don't hurry, just get seated, and I'm going to take care of you. So the men sat down, and it numbered about 5,000. And Jesus took the loaves. First thing he did was he gave thanks to the Lord, even for the amount that he had, which wasn't much in comparison to these people. But he thanked God for even the little that he had, and that he was going to share with everybody else out of love and compassion. And when he had given thanks, he distributed them to the disciples, and the disciples to those sitting down, and likewise of the fish as much as they wanted. Wow, as much as they wanted. As much as they wanted. Jesus took the loaves, he distributed to the disciples, and you can see that when Jesus gave to the disciples, the miracle was moving right then and there. Because he started out with what he had. It didn't say he asked for more abundance. He didn't say, "Lord, shower us with more food." The miracle was when Jesus was giving it to them. Remember, when it was the little boy stuff, he had 5 and 2, but when Jesus had, he had a lot. And Jesus distributed through the disciples. Jesus had people who were doing some work, and they went and distributed. And as much as they wanted, they got to eat it. God has an abundance if you call on him. So all the people ate until they were satisfied. Even with the little bit that they had an abundance. God does so much with so little. So after they got done and everybody was satisfied, there's still something to eat. So when they were filled, he said to his disciples, "Gather up the fragments that remain." There was some left over. God gives you more than you need, so that nothing is lost. Therefore they gathered them up and filled 12 baskets with the fragments of the 5 barley loaves, which were left over by those who had eaten. Wow, God was generous. Jesus was generous. And when they gathered up the fragments that remained, you notice Jesus didn't waste anything. It wasn't throw them away. It was gather them up. We've been given something from the Lord, and we should cherish it, not just waste it. And they gathered up the broken portions, and there were Ooh, a lot left over. Amen.